Hey writer, if you're ready to level up, then buckle up. Get your pen and paper ready. It's time for another episode of the Art and Business of Writing podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Art and Business of Writing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, where today I'm joined by Ryan Scheife. Ryan is the founder and principal designer at Mayfly Designs, where he is experienced in all aspects of book design, including cover design, page design, typesetting, and eBooks. He's also knowledgeable in other publishing services for the ever-growing population of independent authors who are setting out on their own publishing journey, including acquiring ISBNs, registering their book with the Library of Congress, and assistance with distribution platforms such as KDP and IngramSpark. Mayfly was created to serve the thriving literary city of Minneapolis in 2007 with the mission of celebrating and advancing the universal connection and goodwill of storytelling. In this episode, Ryan and I discuss cover design and typography, as well as industry trends in book covers, why self-published authors should hire cover designers, what authors can do if they can't afford a designer, cover design and image usage rights in stock photography, book design and the elements of a good interior design within a book, and typesetting eBooks. So stick around and hopefully you'll enjoy this episode and get a lot out of it. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Ryan. Hey Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey Chris, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, great to have you as well. So tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and some of your hobbies.
Yeah, sure. So Ryan Scheife, I'm a founder of Mayfly Design, which is a book design agency, and started that back in 2007. And that occupies a lot of my time, but got a couple kids that occupies much of the rest. And we're here in Minneapolis, so we try to get out and enjoy some snow time activities this time of year, which is kind of hard to do, but really get into watching some sports and being outdoors.
Sorry. So you're the founder of Mayfly Design, as you just alluded to. Tell us how the studio came to be.
Yeah, so I got my career start out of college as a graphic designer, working for a local educational publisher here. They're like, "Hey, do you want to design books? We'll pay you $25,000 to do that." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." I'd never thought about designing books, but that's where it led me. And I was doing that for 4 or 5 years, and really admired the contractors that I worked with that did a lot of designs for us too. And I'm like, maybe I can do this on my own. So I just kind of set out and just kind of jumped and made it happen.
Yeah, I mean, because authors it's a very specific segment because, you come across a lot of studios and they do, multiple services, whether it's like full-on graphic design or graphic design and advertising, plus they do the book design, but you guys specifically work with authors. So how was it getting that off the ground, getting that target market to work for you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the landscape has definitely changed as far as our customers. So it started out just kind of working with clients that I had known, in our circle here in the Twin Cities, those being publishers. But more and more throughout the years, we would get these independent authors. We used to call them self-published authors, but now we're trying to kind of change that language to independent publishers because they're kind of doing it all on their own. So that just became more and more of our client base. And it definitely is more than half at this point, maybe even 75%. And it's just how the world is turning. There's all these people that have all these tools at their disposal to publish their own book. We're one piece of the process, but it's just more and more those people are just finding us and needing our help.
Yeah. And so What services do you offer independent authors and to help them with their publishing process?
So that's a good question, and it's kind of evolving as we go. Um, Basically, we our core business is the design, so cover design, page design, typesetting, eBooks, but we've had to sort of become experts in other parts of the process where they are trying to get their ISBN numbers, they're trying to register their book with the Library of Congress, they're trying to upload their materials to KDP or Ingram or BookBaby or wherever. And so we've just had to educate ourselves in how that is done and be prepared to help people either on the front end or back end, just kind of as needed.
Yes, let's dial into some of those services, starting with cover design. So, what does that entail? In terms of how you handle business.
The cover design process is usually one of the first things we tackle. Authors like to have a front cover, early on, so they can start talking about their book, and when it's going to be released. So the cover design process is we like to have it be as collaborative as possible. We have a questionnaire that we send out authors early in the process to kind of get them thinking about what their cover can look like, what their aesthetics are, and what this means is send us some JPEGs you find on Amazon of book covers you like. That way we can kind of understand what they're looking for. It's not specific ideas, but just kind of getting the creative process going. And on our end, it starts with some research, font explorations, colors, images, and putting together usually 3 concepts for the author to look over, respond to. Maybe we'll set up a Zoom call to look them over. And the idea is we have at least one out of those 3 that's a real winner that we can make some changes to and get something they really love.
No, that sounds fantastic. Now, a lot of independent authors feel like professional cover design is out of their budget. This can lead to some of them turning to Canva or some other do-it-yourself services. What would you say to encourage independent authors to reconsider, handling their own covers and instead turning them over to a service provider like yourself?
Well, people have a lot of different expectations, and we certainly don't discourage authors from going those routes. I would encourage people to do something like a Canva, where it's a do-it-yourself tool, versus going with a crowdsourcing like Fiverr or Upwork or something like that. We've not had much. We've not heard many good things about people that go those routes, and usually they end up paying $100, $500 for something that they don't use anyway. So from what I've heard, it's kind of a waste of money, but it's just kind of up to the author and their budget. We understand that it's a big portion of the budget, but it is it's a creative process. It does take a long time if it's done right. So we're not here to discourage the authors to go one way or the other. It's just whatever they're looking for, but you'll certainly get your money's worth if you pay for it and trust the experts to do what they do best.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I don't know, just when you hire a skilled cover designer, they understand aspects of the process that most authors don't. Like, I think a lot of authors tend to think of covers as like it's just a pretty design. I'm just throwing things, I'm putting an image together, I'm putting type on there, I'm putting my name on there. But there's so much more to a cover design than that. Can you talk about, what are the things that you as a designer understand that most independent authors don't understand about cover design?
Well, we know the industry, we know publishing pretty well, and know, we kind of keep an eye on design trends. So hopefully we have a lot of that knowledge to bring to the table. What was the question? Sorry, I totally spaced.
Yeah, the question is just, what do you as a designer know and understand that most independent authors may not understand about cover design?
Yeah. So what's important to know about the cover design process is more than likely you're designing a book cover that is going to have to look good at a size about 1 inch big on a computer screen. Mostly meaning when people are searching on Amazon, how is it going to grab your attention? So simple is best. Keep the type, especially the title, nice and large where you can see it at a small size. Don't get too wrapped up in super small details. Of course, the book it should look good when it's sitting on a bookshelf somewhere at a local bookstore or in someone's hand. But we definitely do keep Amazon in mind when we're designing covers and make sure that it looks good, at that size on the bookshelf on Amazon.
All right. And talk a little bit about image use. I know that, there's lots of free stock sites that authors can turn to or use. What does an author need to know about image use and licensing when they're doing their covers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And definitely don't just grab something online just because it's there. That's a big no-no. You're probably going to run into issues with it not being good enough quality to use in the print world, but B, you just can't grab stuff off the internet. So go to a reputable stock site. We use websites like Shutterstock and Stocksy and all that sort of stuff. Quite often, it's cost effective. Usually, we don't charge extra for images we use in our cover designs, and that it's licensed properly, and it's pretty affordable, and they're nice large images. So just go to a stock site. You'll pay $10-20 for a great image. I recommend if you have the means to tweak it in a way where it kind of becomes a little more original, meaning someone else downloads the same image and uses it on their book cover. That's totally fair game. So you do have that to look out for. So just find a favorite stock site and search away. It's a lot of fun, and you'll find something that works, I'm sure.
All right. And as far as in the inside of the book, does the creator have to be credited for that, or are you just able to kind of use it kind of carte blanche and do what you want with it?
Right. They always appreciate a credit, on the copyright page, or maybe on the back cover. If it's for like Shutterstock, it's not required unless you're doing it for editorial purposes. But it's always a good idea, and we don't always do it, but sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
All right, and you mentioned trends a little bit ago. What's trending in the design world right now in terms of covers, from genre to genre? Just kind of give me a walkthrough.
Yeah, simple, bold, bright. That's kind of the big theme for book covers. You look at fiction book covers. You take a look on a bookshelf in in a bookstore. You'll see a lot of similar, sans serif, big, stacked against a single image on the background. Some bold colors. That's definitely the way to go, and that also carries over to business book trends, I believe. Nice big title, subtitle, maybe even woven in the middle of the lines of the title, taking up the whole cover. Definitely the trends now.
And what's the shelf life of most trends? Like, do most trends, are they just year to year? Are they like biannually? Do they kind of go on their own pace? Like, what can you tell us about those sorts of things, like the length of trends?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that, well, I know that there is a shelf life. And I say that because we have folks come to us that, need a refresh on their design that was, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago. So I'm guessing, you're probably in good shape for a good 10 years until, something else comes and dominates. And, it's just like anything. It's, your wardrobe or, your style of your car or the decor of your house, just kind of comes and goes. So I wouldn't really think too much about it, just kind of do what looks good. And hopefully if your book is still around in 10 years and you want to do a refresh, I think that's definitely a positive sign that you made something great.
Yeah. I saw maybe it was a year ago or maybe two, where like that classic like 70s, early 80s sort of trend was coming back. It was kind of fun to
Yeah.
look at. I'm like, that's fun because it's very vintage and old, and it feels very new at the same time.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, and there's exceptions to this because you got to design to what the subject matter is. And we're doing this book about Lawrence Welk, who was, the accordion player and did his show for decades in the 50s and 60s. And so, subject matters like that, you can have fun and kind of design per the era and the period. So it's just going to look like it came from that era, or hopefully close to. But so there's some exceptions depending on what the subject matter is. But yeah.
So should authors aim to follow the trends in their genre, or can they get a little playful and creative with it sometimes?
I like to see people break out of the trends. If we all did the same thing, nothing would change, So definitely explore. I wouldn't, if you're doing a memoir, I would make sure it looks like a memoir and not a novel or a business book. And so when it's sitting on the shelf, it shouldn't be confusing what the subject matter is. And to take that example of a memoir, usually you have some type of family photo, and usually might use a serif font versus a sans serif font, so it doesn't look too too businessy or modern. So there are things to keep in mind for the genre, but definitely don't feel like you're stuck in a box and need to do what everyone else is doing. Otherwise nothing would change.
Right. Now, something I noticed, when I'm perusing through like, writing circles and on Twitter or whatever, is that a lot of authors tend to look at the cover as a reflection of themselves. Like it has to be something that they like. And I tend to think a little different. Like I tend to think that cover should be what resonates most with what the audience is looking to get out of the book. What do you think? What are your thoughts on covers?
Yeah, I think authors struggle with this a lot because they're just so close to the book. They've been writing this for years, and they probably have started to develop what the cover should look like, or could look like, and that could be good, that could be not so good. So I think authors kind of struggle to loosen up a little bit and be open to other ideas. So what we recommend is, here are your covers. If you'd like to go over them together, let us know. But we urge you to share these with your inner circle, people you trust, and get their feedback. People maybe that don't know about the book yet. Don't just rely on yourself. Of course, their opinion is probably the most important, but see what other people are thinking. So sometimes, opening yourself up to other people's feedback might just make it even more of a hard choice, but often it's very helpful. So we definitely do encourage that.
Yeah, something I've always liked to do and I always recommend, authors to do is take the concepts they get, like the cover concepts that come from the designer, and just put them out there. Like maybe it's in their email newsletter, and let their, subscribers kind of vote on them. Because then you get a really good feel of what people are gravitating towards. And then your biases have to go away at that point,
Yeah, no. And we have seen people do that, put it on social media, all three of them alongside, and say, hey, let me know your vote. What are you people gravitating toward? And I've seen other sort of small indie presses do that on their social feeds, like, hey, we just put these together for, these authors, and what do you folks think? I don't know how they weigh in those options, but yeah, it's you might get some good ideas for some tweaks that you might want to see too from other people. So who knows?
Yeah. So for a book cover to be successful, like what does it have to do for the reader? Like for the person who's grabbing it off the shelf, who's looking at it on Amazon, what does a successful book cover really have to do to pull them to click that buy button or to go to the register and
Yeah.
check out with it?
Well, I think it has to look professional. I think that's the biggest thing. And it doesn't have to be super complex or like super deep or emotional. It just needs to look like it was professionally done. Because you can definitely pick out the books on, Amazon, for example, that were done by the author's nephew or whatever, and they just don't look professional. In any way you can, make it seem like you are not publishing this book yourself. And that's not to say that you shouldn't have pride in doing this, but it should seem like it was professionally done. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. And I like to have, if at all possible, sort of that aha moment with the book cover where maybe you don't exactly know what's going on quite yet, but it still looks like a good cover. But maybe with a fiction book, you're like, oh, this looks interesting, but 2/3 of the way through it, you kind of close it and you're like, I get it now. Like I know where this is, or I know what this means. That's kind of a cool thing that you can do sometimes with books, where you just kind of leave a little surprise with the imagery and until the reader actually knows and is working their way through the book.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there. Like, I think as authors, we have to remember that whether we independent publish or hybrid, or whatever we decide to do in terms of our publishing choice, that we're competing with the Simon and Schusters and the Penguins of the world, whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. And so we have to have that same professional image that they have to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and it's not hard to do, and you don't have to spend a ton of money, but definitely have either the right tools. And whether that's Canva or some other means to do this yourself, or hire someone to do it for you. If you have a specific idea in mind, for us at least, it's not as expensive. If you're like, hey, I just want to implement this idea, I know you have the knowledge and tools to do it right, we're totally fine with that. Or if you're like, I have zero idea what this should be, that's the other end of the spectrum, and that's really where the fun stuff comes in for us. But all across the spectrum, we get people needing different things. So
yeah, and avid readers,
that's totally fine.
And people who are book people, they get it. Like they understand what a cover should look like, how professional covers look, the whole shebang, because they're always buying books, they're always looking at books. But can you talk a little bit about the relationship between image and typography? Because I know that as people put their books together or think about their books, they'll find a cool image, but then pair it with like maybe not so cool typography, or they'll have great type, but the image falls short. Can they discuss the relationship between the two?
Yeah. I don't really know how to talk about the relationship between the two. I mean, they're from a aesthetic or maybe more of a technical standpoint. You wanna have probably one or the other be the main component. So you don't want everything to be the biggest, like most attention grabbing thing. So maybe make a decision whether the title is going to be super big and kind of slap you across the face, and then the image is sort of a supporting thing, like in the middle and it's small, or vice versa. When you have too many things that are like, I want to make the title super big and I want the image to be super bold, and maybe that's not a great choice. Often it's best to have one main element that is kind of the attention grabber. But as far as typography, it is surprisingly hard to do to to make typography look great on a book cover. And what you're looking for is not only the font, but also the spacing and the size, and also the proximity of the type elements within each other, title, subtitle, author name. Maybe there's an endorsement on there, but there's a relationship of those text elements that should, gets kind of off balance if they're not working well together. So all that stuff kind of comes into play when you're designing the front cover copy, that just, you can tell when it's just a little bit off. So there's a little bit of skill involved with getting everything balanced correctly on the cover, whether it's just we're talking about the type or the type and the imagery together.
Yeah, and I really like the current trend where the books are very type driven. It's very easy to read, very easy to pick off the shelf, very easy to know exactly what you're getting when you pick it up.
Yep, and you're exactly right. That is definitely what a lot of the books look like nowadays, and I'm totally on board with that. I love playing with type, and I love making it sort of the the main focus and making it look really nice and bold and really balanced.
Yeah, so let's get into page design a little bit. What does uniformity, in the pages do for a book?
Can you clarify that question, I guess?
Yeah. So typically, sometimes you'll come across a book that's, like you talked about, just an independently published book, and the margins may be incorrect or off, or the page, like sometimes people will start chapters on opposite pages, as opposed to maybe all the chapters starting on the right side, or you know what I mean, or section headers. So just talking about more of just making a book uniform on the inside and the importance of that.
Yeah. So there's sort of best practices, I think, that we're talking about here in book design. And so, I think a lot more people can design a beautiful looking book cover. And we're kind of right out of the gates about, marketing agencies or design firms that, just do graphic design. And we've seen some really cool book covers come out of those shops. But really where book designers come in this is the stuff kind of we're talking about here, is the inside of the book. And there are, the best practices are pretty standard, and there's some flexibility, but margins are definitely one thing you need to keep in mind. So text doesn't get too close to the trim or the edges of the book. You don't want a really cramped experience for that reader. And the thicker the book, the more pages, the more margin you need on the inside gutter. So, the thicker the book, the more apt your text is going to be to get sucked in there. So there's stuff to consider there. And then, the type, and I'm sure we'll talk about fonts, but, Times New Roman, not a great choice. But there are other similar fonts that, I use a lot of the same fonts a lot for body text. I used to try to go out and be super adventurous and try out new fonts for body text, and talking about the font for just body text is not super exciting to talk about, but it's the workhorse of the book. And I have probably my top 3 or 4 that I use for most projects, because I know that they work, and they're, if your type is designed and sized and styled correctly, it shouldn't be noticed. If it looks like really bad, then it's very noticeable. So a well-designed book shouldn't be noticed.
And in terms of type size, like in terms of point size, what is the recommended point size? Or does it change from genre to genre?
It changes from font to font. So 11 point Garamond is not the same as 11 point, Bembo or something like that. They're slightly different. So talking about the type size is sort of a relative issue, but usually around 11 points is about a good size. and you need to consider the leading or the spacing in between the lines as well. So, the lines don't get too tight or too loose. But, I'd say I work probably around 10.5 or 11 point for most of my books. And where we start to go larger is usually for the memoirs, for the older reading groups that need a larger type size, and that's totally fine. We might go up to 12 point something for those books.
Are there some like ironclad font choices that are like trending right now that you say, hey, if you're writing, fiction books or fantasy books, these are kind of the ironclad fonts that are just working? Because I've noticed I've even noticed like some nonfiction books now are using like sans serif fonts as opposed to like using serif fonts like they all used to.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to talk about is trends in body text fonts. Not necessarily. I mean, if we're talking about a fiction book or a business book, it's probably going to be set in a serif font. And serif fonts, those for your audience, those are the fonts that have the little feet that sit on them, that like Times and Garamond, and sans serif is the more of a modern typeface that you'd find probably in like a modern coffee table book, photo book, or you're right, business books. Some of the content might be set in a sans serif font, whether it's boxed, text or captions or tables and charts and stuff. So the one thing to keep in mind with the sans serif font is, yes, while it does look more friendly and a little more modern, sans serif fonts are generally harder to read in long bits, full paragraphs. So you should be sure you're using a font that a sans serif font that is readable in larger chunks like that. So most of our books are set primarily in serif fonts, with a few exceptions.
And are there particular fonts that you just say no? Avoid these, like avoid altogether, stay away from these like decorative typefaces or
Yeah, I mean, some authors want to do certain like letters and stuff in like a handwritten type font, and we try to educate our authors in these things. We don't like to say no, but we just kind of like to guide them as to best practices and what's the most readable for their book. So we run into that issue sometimes, and like I said, we just try to educate them, and we really have a lot of flexibility is the display font. So we're talking about chapter numbers, chapter titles, various headings in the book, and that's maybe an opportunity where we can utilize, say we're doing like a business book, and on the front cover there's a really bold title set in a really cool sans serif font. We could maybe carry that font into the inside of the book, not only for the title page but also the chapter titles, and various headings in there, and that really kind of helps create a nice cohesive piece.
All right. And for authors who want to kind of do it on their own, do you recommend they keep a style sheet so they can keep track of what they're using? Like for instance, like you talked about the chapter titles, chapter numbers, maybe subheads, paragraph fonts. Do you recommend they just maintain a style sheet so they know that just as they go throughout their book, okay, I gotta make sure all this stuff stays uniform all the way across?
Yeah, I suppose if you're kind of starting to build a brand, why not jot that down? Because if you're gonna, have a blog or a website, and you want to kind of create that consistency, that's probably a really good idea. And I guess I'd never thought about that, but rarely do authors ask. We provide, just when we're talking about what fonts they're seeing in the page design samples, we provide that information, but often authors don't really ask, so it's good to know.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about eBooks. That's the other big component. What's the difference in typesetting an ebook versus a paperback?
eBooks. Well, there's a lot of differences. When we're talking about fiction novels, it's pretty straightforward. And anyone who has read an ebook on a Kindle or an iPad or whatnot, you know that you have the option to change fonts. You have the options to change the type size, so everything kind of flows forward or back. So everything needs to be very fluid in an ebook. The print world, everything is very predictable and nice and safe and locked in there. But ebooks, you really just kind of give up a lot of control. So our typical process is we design a print book for an author or publisher, and get that all squared away and off to the printer. And then we break away the ebook from that print file. And often we end up having to sort of undesign a few things to have it, fit the ebook format a little bit better and just be more sort of adaptable to how it looks on those readers. So it's not the greatest joy designing an ebook. Like I said, you usually just end up pulling your hair out. Things look really cool on an iPad, almost identical, but you inevitably are going to end up pushing it to Kindle or KDP, and when you do that conversion, all that stuff just usually ends up getting thrown out, and it's frustrating. So again, there's a lot of education we need to do with authors. They're like, well, why is this one line at the top of the page left by itself at the end of a paragraph, or why is this word hyphenating here? And it's just, you just have zero control for all that stuff. And so I try to set authors up, and often with books that are very complicated, like business books, or something with a lot of tables or call outs or something like that. We usually are like, before we even get into it, like, let's set your expectations for this book and how it's gonna operate and work or will not work, and maybe you do or don't want to invest money in doing this as an ebook.
Yeah, I'd say, ebooks they're a completely different animal, especially when you have a book that's got images. It's like, you gotta decide, what do we keep these in? Do we take those out just for the sake of the ebook?
Yeah, and when you have a lot of images, the ebook file gets a little heavy. So you got to watch out for that. If you have hundreds of images in an ebook, it's going to be a big file for folks to download. So a lot of considerations, but I like ebooks. I do read ebooks. I like sitting there in bed reading just a little thing on a tablet, versus a big chunky hardcover with a dust jacket that's falling off all the time. And I get it. It's nice. And as a designer, I'm glad that I stuck through the ebook sort of frustrations. I just kind of taught myself how to do them. A lot of book designers won't touch ebooks because I suspect that they just kind of threw their hands up at some point and said, let me just have someone else handle this. But I'm glad I stuck through it, and it's still a a platform that's changing, and the capabilities are changing constantly. So I see the need for it. I think the huge ebook discussion of like, are they going to take over the paperback? That's died down quite a bit. I don't see the print book going away by any means. But ebooks are here to stay, obviously, and I like them. I prefer to buy just my trashy novels that I read on a Kindle. It's nice and easy.
Yeah, I like ebooks too. It's wild. Like, I have a Kindle, and I use my Kindle a lot. And then when I'm in my bed, sometimes I've got some stuff in my Apple Books. But man, Apple Books is just gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
That interface is unbelievable.
It is gorgeous, and the books look so much better on the Apple platform. I don't know how many people buy books on there, but I wish it were more.
Yeah, it is.
But
it's
it's a
beautiful.
really nice experience.
Yeah, I always tell people, when they're doing like research for covers, I'm like, just look at covers on Apple Books. That's all you do. Just open up Apple Books, just
Yeah,
look at the covers
I
there, and you'll
know.
see just how pretty they are compared to looking at them on
It's really
Amazon. It's a
nice.
different world. Yeah.
It's really nice. What I like about my Kindle is it doesn't have my email on it. It doesn't have, notifications popping up on it,
Yeah.
versus reading it on my iPad where it's like, oh, I get distracted and I, check my Instagram and stuff like that, where it's just my reading device and that's it. So there's that, which I like.
Very true. Very true. So, what are some things that authors can do with an ebook they can't do with a print book?
Um, that yeah, yeah. Let's talk about that because there are some cool things you can do. You could, you know, a lot of people utilize in business books, for example, hyperlinks for references or footnotes, where you can, as long as they're hyperlinked properly, you can click right on them and it'll take you to a web browser, and you can embed videos. Click right in, in your book, and probably more friendly on an iPad device, but you can click on videos and embed those. Um, you can include color. Printing a color book is expensive, but it doesn't matter on an ebook. So you got color photos in there. This is a really nice way to really feature those. Photos in an ebook, you can anchor them in there so they're kind of small, but most devices, when you touch on them, they'll blow up full page. So zoom in on them and kind of cruise around if you're looking at maps or something on there. So definitely some advantages to ebooks depending on what content you're trying to get out there.
All right. Now, something else you do at Mayfly is you guys help authors with the kind of the post-production and marketing services. Talk about some of the
Mm-hmm.
things that you offer.
Yeah, so like I said, I started doing this 2007, so we're going on 15 years here. But just this last year, my wife jumped on board, as a business partner here, and she was doing marketing in corporate America. And I think after COVID and being home for a year and a half and then being asked to come back, it was kind of like, this is just not my priority now. So we had been ideating a lot of ways that we can take Mayfly Design around this time last year, and so she came on board, and um, we're trying to put a focus on sort of some of the back end stuff that we can offer authors, because we just keep getting those questions of, how once I get this book, how do I get it to my audience? And for now, what we're doing is we're encouraging authors to have a web presence. A simple author page, website is a good way of showing that you're a serious author. Maybe they can or can't buy the book there, but I think it's a good idea to have a presence online if people are searching for you, versus just like a Facebook page, for example. We are pretty easy. It's pretty easy to offer some social media assets. So when you're talking about your book, we can put together some graphics for you to use to put the word out there. But we're really trying to figure out how else we can guide authors to drum up more sales. And there's not a magic answer really right now. And really, it's the power of your circle and your, as an author, your audience, and how you can reach them. And getting good reviews on Amazon, I think, is a really powerful way to get more people to see your book. Amazon has a really good, has a really powerful metrics for getting quality reviews that really boosts your book. So we tell authors to really focus on getting folks out there who have bought your book to leave a good review. That goes a long way.
All right. So when an author hires a design firm to do their work, such as Mayfly, what are some things an author needs to ask, like from an interview standpoint, so they know that the designer is the right designer for them and they can work together and collaborate?
Well, I think experience, be sure to ask, how long they've been doing this. If these folks also, make jewelry and, screen print t-shirts and stuff, maybe they're not a book design specialist. So make sure that, they do specifically, work with books and know the publishing world. And I think an important thing to know or to ask is, how they can help you before and after the design and production process. So helping you connect with editors, or if they have editors on staff, or other editorial folks, indexing, and then if how they can help on the other end, where like, hey, I plan on posting my book on KDP or going through Ingram to get my book distributed. Are you familiar with these platforms? Could you perhaps help me in that process if I get tripped up? Because it's a really confusing landscape out there, and I'm sure you've heard from authors that there's just a lot going on, and it's really a frustrating exploration if you don't know where to go and who to partner with.
Yeah, it's very true, and I think a lot of authors miss the boat on Ingram. Like it's always a missed opportunity, because I hear a lot of authors like, "Oh, I'm on Amazon," and then either they fail to get their ISBN so they have control of the asset, or or they don't go to Ingram, which cuts the legs of book touring. It really can hurt them from being able to do signings at various places, because that partnership between Ingram and like places like Barnes and Noble or Books A Million. And it's an important thing. And you do that for authors, right? You help them with the ISBN acquisition and setting all that up, right?
Yep, we do, and we call that publishing services. We're not a publisher, but we offer some of the services that a publisher would do for you. Yes, acquiring your ISBNs. You need one for each format. So if you're doing a paperback and an ebook, you need two ISBNs. We can register your book with the Library of Congress, which is a free service from them to do. You just need to know where to go and what info you need to supply to them. And yes, we do offer consultations to sit. We prefer to do this on Zoom. Get up on KDP. We'll kind of walk you through the process, where your final print files will go to upload for your print book, and where to upload your ebook files for your ebook, and make sure you're just kind of not left stranded, at that final step. So that's becoming, we kind of have to be an expert in everything we've learned over the past few years, where authors they're just kind of left out there hanging, and they don't really know where to go. So we like to ask all these questions up front, like, okay, what's your publishing or what's your printing plan? Are you printing 1,000 of these at an offset printer, or are you going to print on demand? And where will that be? Just so we can kind of get an idea of what their expectations are. Often someone would be like, well, I want 500 books printed. And then the follow-up question is, okay, well, what are you going to do with those books? You need to get those distributed somehow. A printer is not going to deliver a freight truck to your front door with a pallet of books. So there's a lot of upfront questions, just so we know what their plan is, and then how we can help them get from point A to point Z, basically.
Yeah, no, it's great that you do that you consult with them and you tell them that, because it's mission critical. Because I know a lot of us authors, we're caught up in the creative side of the business, but we're not looking at the business side of the business, like the logistical side. Like, okay, well, I'm writing the book, but where does it go when I'm done? And it's like you got to think about that from day one.
We love when people reach out to us and they're still writing their book, and we have that question specifically on our intake form, like, where are you at the process? I'm still writing, and you might hear from me in a year, or, you're ready to go now. And it's sort of everywhere in between. But yeah, get started early. It can only help you sort of start thinking about all the players and all the steps.
Yeah. So how can our listeners contact you for a consultation?
Yeah, phone call. We get people that call, using it's on our website, and they're like, "Whoa, you actually picked up the phone? That is crazy." Mayflydesign.com. There's a button to give us a call. There's a button to email us, and on the last page of the website is called Estimate. There's a form there. If you have a project that's ready to go, fill it out. It just asks all the questions about you as an author. Ask you about what services you need from us, and just about your book. What genre it is. Are you doing a paperback, a hardcover, ebook? So we'd like to get all the information up front, and then you'll hear from us in the next day or two.
All right. And you guys on all the social platforms, or?
We're on, we primarily focus on LinkedIn for updates. Not doing Facebook or Instagram right now, but maybe sometime soon.
All right. Well, great, Ryan. Thanks for your time today. This was very informative and a lot of help. And I know a lot of authors will get a lot of, mileage out of this interview.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
How's that for inspiring? I hope you take action on one thing you learned in today's episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast and left a review on iTunes, I want to encourage you to do that too. Finally, be sure to visit chrisjonesinc.com to sign up for updates. Don't worry, I won't spam you. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.